and today we have a very special guest. She's the country sales manager for Maersk Sri Lanka. Worked as for currently at Maersk since 2018 and has been driving the Maersk integrated strategy in Sri Lanka and also enable placement of Sri Lanka as a key logistic hub for Maersk globally. And Maersk had identified Sri Lanka as one of the 6 flex hub ports in the world. In addition to her tenure, she has also successfully worked on driving SME support programs through Maersk Sri Lanka. Prior to joining Maersk, our speaker today was employed with Unilever Sri Lanka for 12 years, handling multiple roles across the supply chain and customer service, post joining the organization as a management trainee. Our eminent guest today holds a BSc in genetics from the University of Bangalore, MBA from the Postgraduate Institute of Management, PIM, and currently reading for the PhD. A past pupil of Vishaka Vidyalaya, an executive council member of Vista. May I introduce to you Randima Krishnaratna. Randima, over to you.
Hi, thanks Dr. Ohanta for that extremely generous introduction. And thanks once more for this invite. I'm really glad to actually, share whatever I know or what I could add on to the students of this MBA program. So I'm really glad to be here actually.
Thanks, Randima. So let me hand over the reins to you, where you will initially, I think, take us through a few thoughts on how you're going to manage your costs on logistic management, and then subsequently we'll have a Q&A. Is that okay?
Sure, that's totally fine. So if I may, sure. If I could share my screen. Yeah, it's visible, right?
That's fine.
Is the screen visible?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Is the screen visible? Yeah. Okay. So I think when I talk about logistics, it's not a complex or a very new term to us, because logistics as it is has been there from the time human race was actually human race has been there in some form or the other. I think there is also one of these sayings where I think Napoleon has actually said that logisticians win the wars. But that's not to say, logistics can do it all. However, I think today in this extremely volatile global environment, it's very important what we can do in the field of logistics to actually bring down the cost or ensure that cost is maintained at an optimal level. So to begin with, I think in Sri Lanka, if we see what you see on these pictures, because when one of the things I actually like to do is to let the pictures speak a lot, or the images in my presentation speak a lot actually. So if you see, the main exports out of Sri Lanka is actually the apparels, the tea or the rubber, which we do have a considerable export market which is based out of tires. And there is an entire logistics chain or a supply chain which drives the backbone of these exports of taking Sri Lanka actually to the world. And if I move on, I think one of this image most of you would have seen all over media, all over social media in the last couple of weeks, right? I think today, if you even Google container, the first thing that would come on Google will be Evergreen, or this Ever Given container ship which was stuck in the sewers. So what did this actually teach us about logistics? What we got to know, I think what most of the global audiences got to know is the cost of one ship being stuck in this Suez Canal. That actually got us an insight of how fragile the global trade is, and actually how important in one sense that logistics is to global trade. So just few facts on this whole Suez Canal, which I believe most of you would also know. 12% of the global trade actually moves via the Suez Canal, and in a day, around 50 ships actually move through this canal. So it's actually quite a narrow strip where you will have to have some tugboats guiding you, and it's not really. It's generally in one stretch there would only be one vessel which actually passes through. So what did this Ever Given vessel getting stuck in the Suez Canal, what was the impact on the global economy? It's around a $9 billion impact, and actually which cost something like a $400 million per hour loss across to the companies, or like rather the global trade, because of the cargo that was actually stuck in this Suez Canal. So that's in a way which really brings out what the impact of logistics could be. And why is logistics so important? So basically in logistics you would mainly see whether it is carrying cargo from one place to the other. It can be anything from a container ship up to, from a container ship, size of a container ship, up until a drone. Today we do deliveries even in drones. If you see what Amazon does, they do deliveries in drone. So it's from, and your customers are of varying size. Whether you are selling a product or a service, there is an element of logistics that's always involved in it. There is the level of warehousing, the storage. It may be an extremely fancy warehouse with artificial intelligence, or even one of those warehouses or storage units you see very often being sealed by authorities these days, which either has some storage of rice or some storage of certain food items. So all this distribution, the warehousing, the transport, all this is actually part of logistics. So why does it become extremely important to a company's bottom line, or why, how can it actually drive value? One of the key reasons in today's global environment is what you could see in today's global environment mainly is what we call a VUCA world. I think this is a term most of you would have heard in terms of the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, and the ambiguity. So I think if you look at the volatility, we have so much of fluctuations on demand and supply. There is trends which keep changing so fast. If you see, Sri Lanka is one of our key exports, of course, is the apparels, and the amount of change in this whole fast fashion. What is in fashion today is not in fashion tomorrow. So we need to ensure that whole supply chain, that we have the logistics. Maybe earlier one used to use ocean freight, right, or to send your cargo in a container. But today the change is so fast, you might have to air freight. Then how do you manage your cost for something you were sending earlier on air freight, which is today which you sent on sea freight, which is today going on air freight? Then if you see, the uncertainty, I think the picture of COVID, I don't think I need to go any further to explain what uncertainty brings in the times of COVID, because I think over the last couple of years, we've had so much of non-forecasted events. Generally, in a supply chain, in marketing, we are used to going through a forecast, even in sales, to learn from the past data and really work upon that past data to work out a trend and work on the numbers as per whatever the past trend was. But with so much of uncertainty, where there is absolutely no predictability, it has become extremely difficult today to actually set a forecast and set a plan, or today you might be running a production line, say for producing shoes. If you're a shoe manufacturer, you might be saying suddenly, you've had take an example, previously you were selling 10,000 units of size 8 shoes, right? The ones with the lasers. And that would have been, okay, so maybe you need more shoes when the schools start. So you might be able to have like a back to school campaign, that is your demand. But today there might be, it's just some famous person or influence has just got to put wearing maybe a different shoe with a buckle, not with the lace. Just put that size 8 shoe on Instagram or make a TikTok video out of it. Next moment, your demand will spiral. And that's where logistics come in. How do you actually cater to that demand at the speed your customer or consumer wants? Then, of course, the complexity, because there's so much of non-standard events or so much of complexity. It's actually like this whole bowl of thread where you don't know how to come out of it. There will be so many requirements. If you just look at global trade, even within a region like South Asia, the amount of clearances that you need, the amount of different regulatory requirements, what is accepted. For example, you might need a certificate of fumigation to send tea into Australia. If you're exporting tea out of Sri Lanka to Australia, you need a fumigation certificate. And in certain instances, the country might say your fumigation certificate has to come from only 1 or 2 approved authorities, that it cannot come from somewhere else. And if you take something like an export to US, you have to have what is called a CTPAT compliance. And today there's so much of complexity because increasingly consumers and companies are looking at sustainable products, even up to the level of sustainable sourcing or responsible sourcing. People are extremely concerned where the goods they manufacture come from, in which factory it is produced, whether the workers have suitable working conditions. So all these issues has to be managed, and whether the warehouses that is stored, one of the there's some of the global customers who today insist that all their transportation will have to happen on a hybrid fleet, right? So that is the amount of interest that is on the whole sustainability, and that is something that is actually being marketed and sold worldwide as well. So across the value chain, there is a necessity to actually mitigate this complexity. Then, of course, ambiguity. I think 5-6 years down the line, no one thought Donald Trump would become a president of USA. No one would have ever imagined a Capitol Hill building being stormed, right? So you have so many unknowns, so many events which has no precedent, which has not happened before. Let's not go that far. We never expected, because the Suez Canal, for 50 years, there was trade happening. There were ships moving day in, day out, more than 300 vessels going through the Suez Canal without a problem. But then after 56 years almost, there was one ship that got stuck, and that crippled world trade. And that one ship will create a ripple effect on world trade, at least in terms of the cargo timings, at least for 2 to 3 months. So what also happens is there is so much of, you don't have the level of clarity, even in a time where we live with a lot of data, a lot of real-time information, because today, for example, there is this whole collaborative planning that had been developed between, I think you all would have also heard about this previously, between Walmart and P&G, where every time the P&G diapers is, a unit of P&G diapers is purchased off shelf, it actually triggers, in the whole supply chain, it triggers a reverse purchase order on a, from Walmart, it triggers a reverse purchase order on a P&G system. But even with that level of data integration, what we see today is actually, so much of ambiguity, lack of clarity. So it makes the supply chain, or not just the supply chain, but the whole global trade or any product or service, the delivery of that product and service so much more volatile, which is where, it becomes a struggle really to work on managing the cost to serve. Now, how do you really work on this cost to serve? So if you're to manage the whole volatility, you have to have this proactive volatility management. So basically, that is, you will have to know in advance how to charter these troubled waters. Now, for example, one of the mechanisms that is used in supply chain today is what is called postponement mechanisms, or in terms of logistics, to have an in-transit storage, so that you don't have your final finished product. You don't spend the entire amount of producing your final finished good, but have it at a semi-assembled or sort of a middle in transit situation. And we also see today the whole, I think one of the things I'm very passionate about, which is this whole hub strategy, or having Sri Lanka as this transit hub. And that is something which we see in the countries or in the ports which have the whole geographic connectivity, such as Sri Lanka, Tanjung Pelepas, or Singapore. Their companies are increasingly using these ports as a stopgap solution to manage their logistics costs. So basically, until they find a final buyer, they would keep their stocks at a port like a Colombo or a Dubai or a Singapore, so that they can continuously run their supply chain, continuously keep producing, and sell to a supplier or sell to their final buyer only when they have the confirmation, and at the same time ensure that their supply chains are not disrupted. Then, of course, I think one of the biggest lessons out of COVID is the resilience. How companies have been, I think there are so many companies in Sri Lanka, despite all the troubled times, have been able to perform well, and who have found new ways. I mean, look at how e-commerce has boomed, right? We did not have this level of e-commerce even in Sri Lanka, while we still do prefer a face-to-face interaction. I mean, let's look no further than Amazon, whose logistics spend in a year is 28 trillion, almost coming up to 28 trillion overall. But still, if you look at the level of service they do, the level of profits they make, so that's really how they manage their cost to serve while investing in the warehouses. In Amazon warehouse, I've actually seen like the time they take to, and this is a place which has more than 1 million stock keeping units or different types of products, and the time they take to find when they get an order, like what they call a pick, the time they take to pick in certain warehouses a product is only 7 seconds. And this is in a warehouse which has the whole more than 1 million products. And by having that speed, they are really they are able to reach the customer faster, make the sale faster, and therefore their cash to cash cycle becomes much more faster. And that's really in terms of using artificial intelligence in logistics, and really effectively using logistics to manage or really have the optimal cost in the supply chain. Then, of course, I think in terms of managing complexity, increasingly companies are looking at doing what they do best and outsourcing the rest to the experts. So what we see mainly in logistics is you do see a lot of 3PLs, you do see what is called a lot of 4PL who manages the entire value chain for you. And basically from a company's point of view, really simplifying the value chain. I mean, if you look at a Tesla or an Apple, they would do the core manufacturing or the research and development. But all the other ancillary manufacturing, the assemblies are mainly outsourced, right? So where they look at really simplifying their value chain, not making it overly complicated, so that they can deliver the product at an optimal cost to the customer. Then, of course, finally, in terms of battling ambiguity or overcoming ambiguity, one of the best ways is to embrace innovation. Now, I think in innovation, most of us would like to think it is going digital, necessarily not all the time. It is just doing something new or keep inventing the wheel new. I think Dr. Rohantham would be much better than me at elaborating on this. But in fact, I think when I was a child, for me, an apple was only something I ate, right? But in the last 20 years today, if I ask my son what is an apple, he would just show me the phone. That's the first thing that comes to his mind, not the apple that came to my mind when I was a child. So and Apple is, I think, the best example you could show in terms of embracing innovation, how they have basically created trends or managed all these ambiguities. And what we see is companies innovate. Like, I think even in this whole, one of the things I've seen in Sri Lanka in the recent times, which is an extremely positive trend, again, is how do they change their delivery methods to the customers, right? How we sort of went and embraced the whole online purchases, online deliveries as a result of the COVID. And even if you take specifically the logistics sector, there was so much of physical documentation that happened. But I think even as a result of COVID, there was a lot of customs processes which were automated. There was a lot of ports authority or aviation authority processes that were automated. So in a nutshell, what I would say, why we need to have logistics for cost management is, again, I think any company would spend at least around 20 to 25% of their entire cost would be on logistics. So if you manage that 25%, and that 25% not just on the cost, it matters because your service levels are affected on how you handle logistics. And research has shown every time, even as a product or a service, if you are not available on shelf, so maybe if you're selling shampoo, that specific variant is not available. And I think I always relate this to a mother's relationship with a child, right? There are few things, if a child cannot get that mother's love or care, there are few things a child might do, right? Child will look for an alternative, right? It's the same way when a product or service is not there, you will go and look for an alternate product. And or the child may, just wait. There will be a few children who will just wait for the mother to come. And they may even, find it in, like if it's a product you buy in a specific store, you may go to a different store or a different vendor, or you may get used to an alternate variant and then not go back to your original product or service. So what research shows is, I think 26% of the time, if a product or service is not available, the consumer or the customer never goes back to that particular product. That is 26% of the market loss. And this 26% predominantly will happen if you don't have the right logistics. So that in one side, it is also keeping your market base, ensuring that you sustain your market share, ensuring you keep your customers satisfied, but also in terms of managing the costs, that you invest correctly. That if you need to invest in a warehouse, how big should you invest in a warehouse? Now, if you have a product which is seasonal, do you need to then keep a warehouse throughout the whole year? Or you just need to, then you shouldn't really build a warehouse of your own. Maybe you go for a rented space where you could use it. In Sri Lanka, we normally see the two main peaks, one around Sinhala New Year, and then of course around Christmas, right? So whether you need a warehouse to use during those periods. Then of course, we also see generally around the salary day, right? There is a peak in purchases. So then how do you cater as a logistics provider or in your company from a logistics perspective? How do you manage that spike? And then you may also have the products which have constant demand throughout. Then how do you, manage the logistics of that particular product or service? And then in the same company, you may have what you will really need to have is a clear segmentation strategy in terms of even handling the logistics, because some products or services you might have faster movement or faster penetration, whereas there may be other products or services which are slower to move. So you cannot have the same logistics strategy. Say, for example, if you are in the business of the hospitals, right, or the health sector. Now, if you're running a service to have an ambulance, you will have to be available on call, right? Your whole logistics is that ambulance being available on time to ensure it has to be a 24/7 operation. Whereas if you're, in like delivering of furniture, or you're running a furniture business, there's a certain lead time you agree with your customer. It's not that you can always say, this is my lead time, and deliver it on that lead time. So then the sort of transport or the sort of delivery mechanism you should have towards that service would differ. So this is actually very few examples in terms of what you can do to really manage your cost to serve. And why I just put only one slide saying managing your cost to service, because that at the end of the day is the key of managing your logistics costs or maintaining it at a suitable level. And I think I'll just end my presentation by this slide. Again, something that is very close to my heart. This is, I think, because when I talk about logistics, I always talk about the Vega team. Because this is somewhere as Sri Lankans we can all be proud of, this set of young people who didn't really have experience in terms of making a car. They dreamt of making a supercar and they actually did it. I think I was fortunate enough to be involved in taking this car to the Geneva Motor Show and back. But in terms of handling the whole logistics of this, from assembling the smallest part up until putting this car on a container and then taking it up to Geneva, this was really in terms of managing the logistics to ensure that final product delivery. This is actually a fantastic case study. And I think it's also more than any logistics. I think it's really the passion that a product like this brings to our country. So which is why I actually just wanted to touch upon that. So I think that's basically what I really had to share in terms of logistics.
Thank you. Thank you, Randima. I think it was very, very interesting to get a different perspective of this whole area of this logistics business. I just want to know, like, why has there been such a sudden explosion in this logistical arena in the last 3 to 5 years?
I think few things. Of course, I can say in one word, it's globalization. But also with all the uncertainties that has happened around the world, so much of different socio-political events, we've seen companies moving their manufacturing bases, relocating their manufacturing. So this has had the impact of the whole logistics boom, because that means if you're moving one factory from, say, China to even to Vietnam, there is that entire factory being removed in terms of equipment, in terms of material, whether you're building a new factory, in terms of people, all of that has started to move. And also the whole evolution of the e-commerce, right? Because today what we see is Amazon is the largest supermarket in the world, in a way, largest retail store, right? And the amount of deliveries they have to do per day. And even if you see in Sri Lanka, we do have all the online platforms, whether it's for delivery of clothes or whether it's for transportation. So it's for me mainly it is this changing of the traditional manufacturing bases, and the other part is the growth of e-commerce, which of course I think e-commerce predominantly, that entire value chain, the biggest component is logistics actually, which is the delivery and the storage of the goods at a place closer to the customer.
What made you move out from a 11-year career in one of the top multinationals in the world like Unilever? What made you say that you were going to take another job in a multinational, but in the total different area?
So I think there is no single answer I can give to it. But of course, I think credit to Unilever, because most of what I've learned in my career has come from Unilever, and I think as being part of that organization, you would also know Unilever prepares you for anything in life, right? Because my basic training, my first degree was in genetics. I am technically a scientist, right? But Unilever molded me into a salesperson. Unilever molded me into a supply chain professional. But there also comes a time in your career where you look at doing different things, right? So where you feel, you need to move out, do something that is different when the role you've been doing in a way, because I always want personally, what I really want to do is just be happy in what I'm doing, and where I can continuously keep learning or making a change. So in terms of move out to Unilever, while it was very difficult for me also, because even personally, I met my husband there, right? So, and my child went to the Unilever daycare. So it's more than really a job for me. But then also, I think when the Maersk opportunity came up, it was also something I did not want to let go. I think to a large extent, Maersk wanted someone from outside the industry because when I came at 2018, Maersk was still predominantly ocean company, but today Maersk is integrator. So they basically wanted someone from a customer perspective. And I also like, because again, being a multinational, for me, there was no big cultural difference. And the same flexible working mechanism or flexible working hours, it really fit with my schedule as well. So which is why, again, I wanted to just take that challenge and see. I think that's a question a lot of people ask, why did you come here? What made you come from something like FMCG to shipping? But I think for me, it's really, in a way, if it's sales, whether I sell a bar of soap or whether I sell container space, it's the same. Even in a supply chain, because I've done both supply chain and sales, whether it is that whole supply chain part of manufacturing the soap, planning for the raw material, planning for the packaging material, ordering it, or forecasting the space for how many containers or how many warehouses I will need, fundamentally it's the same.
So do you feel that the women of Sri Lanka has broken the glass ceiling?
In certain areas, yes. In certain areas, yes. Definitely more in terms of, I think, marketing or FMCG. Unfortunately, in logistics, not much, because honestly, there's only 3% female representation in logistics in Sri Lanka. So I think there is more to go in terms of breaking that glass ceiling in the logistics industry. So I think overall in Sri Lanka, yes in some and no in some.
So in the last 2 to 3 days, we have seen some amazing performance of ladies in the media. So, I mean, is it going to hurt this performance of ladies in...
I think, see, how I would take it, right? From a marketing point, there's nothing called bad publicity, right? In a way, I don't think any of us would have even known that event was there if not for all that situation. But of course, not really, any acceptable behavior. And especially, I think it is not whether it's like women doing it. I don't think as humans, as people, that's not something or an event that should have happened. And of course, there will be the whole thing. This is what happens when you, put women, or that the whole concept of, it's like two women can't be together. All that school of thought will just keep coming up.
So Randima, what is your thoughts on how countries' competitiveness? How competitive is Sri Lanka when it comes to logistics? I mean, is there some index, and where are we placed? How does it work?
I think the main index that looks at is the logistics performance ease of doing business, right? So we are just not even there, honestly. Geographically, the advantage we have not used. And I think we are or at least around 99 in terms of ease of doing business. So we've not ever been able to capitalize on that geographical advantage we have. And there's much more, I think, even in terms of infrastructure, in terms of regulations of ease of doing business, we have a long way to go, honestly.
So do you feel that if the much talked about that Adani deal went through, our competitiveness would have increased?
It depends. I'm not saying Adani. If any investor in a way, it would have given FDI as well. It could have been better. And I think not just that, maybe not the fact that we didn't take Adani, but eventually how that entire process was handled towards the end, that hurts investor sentiment.
So why has the cost of freight increased like 3 times in the last 1 year? I mean, like, for example, the other day I met this gent who was saying that it cost about $900 from China, and now it's touching almost $3,000. What is
Yes.
so? Is there any merit to this discussion, or what do you feel, Radhima?
It is, I think that gentleman is lucky to get it at $3,000 firstly, but because it's even higher than that now. But what's happened globally is, see, when COVID came, there was out of China, the production stopped, right? So in the first couple of weeks or towards end Jan and Feb, we didn't see the whole peak we see from the China exports, right? So the China sort of their production stopped. There was lesser cargo coming out of China. There were even blankings that was planned, and then of course there was a whole shutdowns in the world. Therefore, there was a capacity reduction initially, and because of that capacity reduction, of course, the shipping lines, of course, did the capacity reduction to manage the cost because they couldn't be operating empty vessels when China basically, is the largest manufacturer in the world. But then also what happened is China recovered, and there was unprecedented amount of cargo that was coming out of China. There was more and more requirements on this whole e-commerce lifestyle. There was the whole e-commerce boom, and there was the necessity to have more, but the capacity just remained the same. So the capacity did not increase because the planned blankings, none of that could change. You had to go through as per those schedules because there is an entire supply chain that is evolved around it in terms of getting space or a slot at a port once you say this is what it is. And then there was a lot of port disruptions. There were a lot of ports in the world which were affected by COVID. So there was a lot of port congestion. And therefore, like sometimes even in Colombo port, there was a time we had to stay for more than 8 to 9 days for the ship to just berth on a terminal. It was a similar situation in Tanjung Pelepas, similar situation in Singapore. It was like 5 to 6 days, when in Singapore in less than 2 to 3 hours regularly you get a port berth. So all of this congestion actually led to a capacity limitation, and as a result, the price became much higher. And also if you see before COVID, I think especially, see, out of Sri Lanka, the other part which we don't really understand is, or which we generally in the large equation forget from a domestic perspective, is 80% of what comes to Colombo is transshipment. Only 20% is imports and exports. So as a result of this 80% of transshipment happening out of Colombo, out of the 7.2 million containers we handle in a year, because 80% is the ships are coming full or going full, right? Therefore, there's only the 20% that has to be filled out of Colombo. So the rates were much lower for Colombo customers. They were enjoying one of the best rates in the whole world. But what has happened now is, because there's such a capacity limitation, there is much less space out of Colombo. And of course, from like a shipping line point of view, what will happen is the higher paying cargo from Far East or other origins will get priority over Colombo. And if Colombo cargo has to go through or to compete with that cargo, then of course the prices will have to be higher.
So, well, you're studying for a PhD, no, Randima?
Yes.
What makes you saying in your career you need to do a PhD, and how does it help you?
So I think why I started doing a PhD is not really from the professional career point of view, because I like to do it. And but my subject is actually on corporate social entrepreneurship, and that's something I like doing, because I do a lot of studies on entrepreneurship. I mean, I read about it a lot, and I also try to practically, work with the entrepreneurs. And one of the things I even do at Maersk is drive this whole SME strategy, work with the SME sector, because that's something I am passionate about. And eventually something that I would really like to promote, because I think as a country, this is like our biggest potential to really go and make a difference in the world.
So, what's your advice to a young MBA student?
I think, first of all, I'm not an expert in giving advice. My husband has clearly told me never give advice to anyone. Because, however, I think, for me, when you get opportunity, take it. I'm not sure most of the time whether it's this, sometimes there's a Sri Lankan culture, or to say we'll think about it, whether I can do it, not ever to doubt yourself. Things will fall into place, but when opportunities come, you have to take it. And I think if I look at my career, that's how everything has happened, because I've taken those opportunities.
So, what did you actually learn from your masters at PIM?
A lot. I think, I mean, if you learn from a person like Professor Udita Liyanage, I think that's actually a treasure. What you could learn from people like Professor Liyanage. So, of course, apart from the subject knowledge, because I had no formal education in terms of the business side of it or the commercial side of it, right? So there was a subject matter, but also the quality or the networking out of PIM, right? So I think today I've got like so much of friends or that network, and you learn out of that whole industry experience. So I think for me, the main thing would be, of course, that whole my own industry and non-industry experience that comes out of the PIM.
So, where do you go from here?
That's a question I keep asking myself. I think, for me personally, I always try to have this balance between my work and also my personal life. So for me, what matters most is the happiness and the fact that I'm passionate about what I'm doing. So currently, I'm very passionate about what I'm doing. But for a long term, I think, for me, I am not really afraid to say if I have to stop doing something or maybe focus actually on my son, I would do that. And if one day he says, I want you to stay with me, I would actually do that, right? And I know this is not like a career advice I should be giving to basically, aspiring women, saying that it's okay to be a stay-at-home mother. But that's like personally what I feel. I'll still be happy doing it if ever my son wants it. But if not, I think from here, of course, Maersk also has a lot of opportunities, and there's so much more areas even inside Maersk for me to learn and actually venture. Then, of course, from here, I really need to complete my PhD. And I think one of the things I would actually like to do is, one day to really invest or do a startup or support the startups on social entrepreneurs.
So, since you come from a kind of an organized business background, from Lever to Maersk kind of thing, what are the key challenges that you see, Randima, in doing business?
I think, if you see for the organized business in Sri Lanka, the biggest challenge is the regulatory framework. The fact that there's so much ambiguity around it, that the policy inconsistency, if I may say so, And even if you have to start a business, the amount of documentation you will have to do, the amount of officers you will have to go to, it's not easy, right? So I think the biggest challenge in Sri Lanka is actually the policy inconsistency.
So what is the advice to young Randima, who is 19 years old?
I think I think the advice would be to be more receptive to what the world says. You know, there are a lot of avenues in the world. I think because again, as a child, or maybe it's the era we grew in, we didn't have a lot of access to information, or we were, honestly, I can't really blame him. We were also not very interested in it as children. We would do like, because my friends did science for A-levels, I did bioscience as for A-levels. It's not that, I was really interested in doing it, but then of course I really liked doing genetics. But I think the advice would be to be open-minded, explore opportunities, explore the world, and try to know a lot more.
So, if the president calls you tomorrow and says, I want your advice, I have a 2/3 majority, but things are not working, what is that single advice you would give him?
Okay, now you put me in a bit of a spot in terms of the president calling. I think the one advice I would be is to just make the regulation simple. I mean, just at least one small thing. Even to start a business, let's have one set of documents, just one document, one office. That whole single window concept, that's like the main thing, in my view, what's needed.
Thank you very much, Randima. It was lovely chatting with you and sharing your ideas with the MBA students of the University of Staffordshire. And I hope you will take some time off when sessions start live and maybe share a few thoughts, and they would like to maybe discuss with you in person. I think it's fantastic talking with you. You gave a view of our import-export industry of almost 10.5 billion, and how this whole area of logistics come to play, and why it has grown in the last 3 to 5 years, and the kinds of challenges you have, and what you so very rightly discussed is, you had this ship that was stuck in the Suez Canal, and then only you realize, how dependent you are on world trade. So my final question to you is, how has the pandemic what are the adjustments you have done to cope with the pandemic?
A lot, I would say. So I'll just give a very brief story, right? So the office, we used to have around 150 to 200 people coming every day to collect what is called this delivery orders, all this shipping documentation, right? And at the first few days of now we had to maintain this 1 meter distance. So it was extremely impossible. And I think we tried everything. And one day there was a commotion. I think there were some video clips also that which were circulated when we were trying to get hold of people and saying, just stay 1 meter apart, because it simply wasn't working. I mean, we had to take precautions. We had to ensure safety of our, colleagues in office, right? So then it just went on like this for 1 or 2 weeks. Then we took a call saying, we'll just do everything electronically. Now, even after putting it was, we were first giving the choice. Now, even in the height of the pandemic, when there was a whole lockdown, we still had people who got curfew passes and came. So when we didn't make it mandatory and gave a choice, saying who wants to, you can do your deposits online, you don't have to come here, we still had the same 150 people coming. So then I think we just took a call saying, no, done, it's mandatory. Everyone has to just do everything online. Because I think that's the biggest change in terms of the pandemic. going online, and that ensure the safety both in terms of our customers and also our colleagues, and also the whole ease of doing business. And just imagine how much customers would have spent just coming here to get a set of documents. And then, of course, we were also able to get some of the documentations from the Sri Lanka Customs. They've agreed to go online. Then in terms of the Ports Authority, they agreed to go online. So I think that was really the brighter side of COVID. Then, of course, again, the whole work from home. I think on a point, it was not much of a change, because given that we already had the flexi hours, but then at the beginning, to ensure all this connectivity was there, and that we had to still go through as normal. And I think despite all these challenges, actually in last July, if I'm not mistaken, as a company, we actually did our highest ever volume for the almost 30 years we've been in this country. So I think it's also how we had been able to, and then we also had our online platforms, which the customers were not very willing to use. But post the pandemic, it actually became the penetration just went off. It almost doubled, tripled, and the customer adaptation to these online platforms was much more. And today they feel the ease of doing that business. Just logging onto your mobile phone. And I mean, today, even if, just give a brief example, even if you say somewhere quite off, maybe like Anuradhapura, you can just book your container sitting in your house. You could just book your cargo to be taken from Anuradhapura to any place in, say, UK. So that's how easy it is. And I think that those are the real positive behaviors we've been able to drive out of the pandemic.
Thank you so much, Randima. Lovely chatting with you, and let's meet up live when the classes start. Appreciate.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you, Randima. Appreciate.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Bye. Bye.